In the heart of the 19th century, the American West was a landscape of immense promise and unforgiving peril. For those chasing fortune, the Rocky Mountains of Colorado were both the gateway and the gatekeeper. But in the winter of 1874, these mountains became something more: a tomb, a witness, and the setting for a mystery that history has never fully solved. This is the story of a group of men who gambled their lives against the snow, and the one man who walked out of the wilderness alone, carrying a story so dark it would haunt the nation for over a century. This is the story of Alfred Packer. Our tale begins not with Packer, but with a group of 21 ambitious prospectors. In November of 1873, they arrived at the camp of Chief Ouray, a leader of the Ute tribe, near the base of the San Juan Mountains. Winter was already closing its grip on the high country. Chief Ouray, knowing the mountains better than any man, warned them. He told them the journey they planned was impossible, that the snows would be their shroud, and that they should wait for the spring thaw. Most of the men listened, but a small, desperate handful refused to be deterred. Gold fever is a powerful motivator, often more powerful than reason. This is where Alfred Packer enters the scene. At the time, he was a relatively unknown figure, a man who had drifted through various jobs without ever truly settling. He approached the remaining prospectors, a group of 5 men: Shannon Bell, Israel Swan, Frank Miller, George Noon, and James Humphrey. Packer presented himself as an experienced guide, someone who knew the mountains and could lead them through the treacherous passes to the gold fields of Breck. He claimed the 120-kilometer journey would take them just a few weeks. The men, eager and perhaps blinded by their ambition, agreed. They had no way of knowing that Packer's experience was questionable at best, and his knowledge of this specific, brutal route was virtually non-existent. On February 9th, 1874, Packer and his 5 companions set off from Chief Ouray's camp, armed with what they believed were enough provisions for a short journey. They walked into the biting wind and the rising snowdrifts, disappearing into a vast, silent wilderness of white. As they vanished from sight, they also vanished from the known world. Days stretched into weeks, and weeks bled into months. No word came from the Packer party, no smoke signals, no messages carried by passing travelers. The world outside the mountains moved on. Assuming the 6 men had become another tragic statistic claimed by the merciless Colorado winter, the silence from the San Juans was absolute. Then, 66 days later, on April 16, 1874, a lone figure stumbled out of the mountains and into the Los Pinos Indian Agency, a remote outpost south of Gunnison. It was Alfred Packer. He was gaunt, his eyes hollowed by an ordeal few could imagine. He collapsed, weak from hunger and exhaustion. At first, the men at the agency saw him as a miracle, the sole survivor of a doomed expedition. They offered him food, shelter, and a sympathetic ear. Packer began to tell his story. His first account was one of pure tragedy. He claimed that the group had quickly become lost in the relentless blizzards. Their food ran out far sooner than expected. He said he had left the others behind weeks earlier, when he was still strong enough to seek help, while they were too weak to continue. He had survived, he explained, on roots and small game. It was a harrowing tale of survival against impossible odds. The men at the agency, familiar with the brutality of the mountains, had little reason to doubt him. Sympathy poured out for the lone survivor. But that sympathy soon began to unravel. Small details started to prick at the edges of a story. People noticed that for a man who claimed to have been starving for weeks, Packer didn't look as emaciated as one might expect. He also seemed to have a surprising amount of money, which he spent freely at the local saloon. More disturbingly, he was seen carrying items that belonged to the other men: a rifle that belonged to one, a skinning knife to another. When questioned, Packer's explanations were evasive. His story began to shift. In this new version, he claimed the men had begun to die one by one from starvation and exposure. Israel Swan, the oldest, was the first to perish. The others, driven by desperation, resorted to the ultimate taboo to survive. Packer insisted he had only participated after the others had started, and that he had only consumed the flesh of those already dead. He then claimed that another member, Shannon Bell, had gone mad from hunger and killed the remaining men with a hatchet. Packer said he was forced to shoot Bell in. It was a horrifying, sensational confession, but it painted him as a victim of circumstance, not a villain. Suspicion, however, had already taken root. The local community was divided. Was Packer a desperate survivor forced into unimaginable acts, Or was something far more sinister at play? The authorities decided they needed more than just his ever-changing story. They needed proof. A search party was organized, led by the original artist from Harper's Weekly who had sketched the men before they left, who now served as their guide into the mountains. Packer agreed to lead them to the campsite, but his directions were vague and confusing. After days of fruitless searching, the party grew suspicious of his motives and returned empty. Packer was arrested on suspicion, but soon escaped from his makeshift jail. The mystery might have ended there, with Packer a fugitive and the truth buried under the snow, but the mountains do not keep secrets forever. In August 1874, months after Packer's return, another man, a photographer named John A. Randolph, was working in the mountains. High on a plateau above the Gunnison River, he made a gruesome discovery. It was the remains of the 5 men. The scene was nothing like Packer had described. The bodies were not scattered as if men had died at different times. They were found together in a single location. Their flesh had been systematically stripped from their bones. And most damning of all, there were clear signs of violence, hatchet marks on the skulls, signs of a struggle. There was no evidence to support Packer's story of men dying peacefully from starvation or of a single crazed man attacking the others. The evidence pointed to a methodical, violent end for all 5. With the bodies found, the hunt for Alfred Packer intensified. He was eventually found 9 years later in Wyoming, living under an assumed name. He was arrested and brought back to Colorado to stand trial for the murder of Israel Swan. The trial was a national spectacle. Newspapers across the country printed every lurid detail. Packer once again changed his story, returning to the version where Shannon Bell was the killer and he had acted in... The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. They argued that Packer, knowing the route to the agency, had murdered his companions for their supplies and money, then lived off their remains until the weather cleared. The jury was faced with an impossible task: to piece together the truth from one man's contradictory testimony and the silent evidence left in the snow. They found him guilty. The judge, in a sentence that would become legendary, allegedly declared there were 7 Democrats in Hinsdale County. And you son of a bitch, you ate 5 of them. Packer was sentenced to be hanged. But the story doesn't end there. Packer won an appeal on a legal technicality and was granted a new trial. This time, he was tried for 5 counts of manslaughter, not murder. His defense argued that he was forced into his actions by starvation, and the prosecution argued it was a conscious, brutal choice. This time, he was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 40 years in prison. He served 80 of those years before being paroled in 1901. Largely due to a campaign led by a Denver Post reporter who believed his story, Alfred Packer lived out the rest of his life as a quiet, solitary man, always maintaining his innocence. He died in 1907 and was buried with military honors for his service in the Civil War. His grave remains a tourist attraction to this day. For over a century, historians, forensic scientists, and armchair detectives have tried to answer the questions that linger. Modern examinations of the remains have confirmed the hatchet marks and the evidence of butchery, but they cannot reveal the sequence of events or the motive. Was Alfred Packer a cold-blooded killer who saw his companions as little more than a source of supplies and food? Or was he the unlucky survivor of a descent into madness and desperation? A man who did what he had to do when civilization was stripped away, and only primal instinct remained. The mountains where it happened are silent. They offer no answers. They only hold the echoes of what transpired in that terrible winter. The snows fall each year, burying the past, but the story of Alfred Packer refuses to be buried. It forces us to ask ourselves a deeply unsettling question. When faced with the absolute edge of human endurance, what are we capable of? The truth of what happened up there in the San Juan Mountains died with the last man to walk out of the snow. Or perhaps the truth is still there, waiting in the silence. What do you believe really happened? Let us know your theory in the comments below. Thanks for watching.